He thought a podcast would be safer than television. No live audience to heckle him. No studio band to puncture the mood. No host trained to weaponize applause. Just 2 microphones, warm lights, and a man who smiled like he was there to listen. Prince Harry sat down across from Louis Theroux and felt briefly like he could breathe. Because Louis didn't come in swinging, he came in soft. And that Harry would realize too late was the trap. The studio looked calm, controlled room with a clean orange backdrop, 2 broadcast microphones on sturdy arms, a small table with water cups that didn't clink too loudly when you set them down. Even the air sounded expensive, quiet, padded, built for confession. Louis leaned forward with the kind of posture that said, "We have time." "Thanks for doing this," Louis said, voice low, friendly. "I know you've had a lot of noise." Harry gave the polished half smile he'd perfected over years of a camera flashes and royal walkabouts. Noise is one way to put it. Louis laughed softly, not mocking, just acknowledging. "Right, I'm not here to do that. I'm not here to catch you out." Harry felt his shoulders ease a fraction. He kept his hands together in front of him, fingers interlaced, like he'd been coached to appear composed and grounded. "I appreciate that." Louis nodded. "I want to talk like human beings. I want to understand." That phrase, "I want to understand," landed like a bomb. Harry had walked into interviews before where the first question was a blade. Here, the first question sounded like a door opening. They started where all the safest conversations start. Origin stories. Louis asked about Harry's childhood, but carefully in the way someone asks about a house that burned down. Respectfully, as if the smoke might still be in the walls. Harry spoke about duty, about grief, about the strange loneliness of being known by people who didn't know you. He chose words that sounded sincere without being too raw. He'd learned that if you bleed too much, they call it manipulation. If you don't bleed at all, they call you cold, so he bled a little. Louis listened without interrupting. He didn't do the talk show thing. No punchlines, no gotcha, no quick pivots, just eye contact and the occasional like a therapist who doesn't want to steal the moment from you. Harry began to forget he was being recorded. That's when Louis reached for the first thread. "It's an odd thing," Louis said. "The way grief can freeze a person in time." Harry nodded slowly. "Yes. And the way," Louis continued, "it can also become a kind of engine." Harry blinked. "What do you mean?" Louis didn't answer immediately. He tilted his head slightly, as if choosing the gentlest path through a minefield. Some people lose someone and then spend the rest of their life building a wall around that loss. Others build a stage on top of it. Not to be cruel, just he spread his fingers, palm up. "It's human." Harry's mouth tightened, but only for a second. He covered it with a controlled laugh. "I don't think I'm building a stage." Louis nodded like he hadn't expected Harry to agree. That was the odd part. Louis didn't press. He didn't challenge. He just accepted the answer as a temporary placement, like a chest piece that would be moved later. Harry leaned back a fraction. The microphone was close enough that he could hear the soft texture of his own breathing. "Can I be honest?" Harry said, voice warmer now. "It's exhausting. People assume they know your intentions. They assume you're doing everything for attention." Louis' eyes stayed calm. "That must feel unfair." "It is unfair," Harry said sharper. Then he caught himself and softened it. "Especially when you're actually trying to do something good." Louis nodded. "Let's talk about that. The good." Harry brightened. This part was safer. The philanthropy, the causes, the work, the talking points that sounded noble without needing to be verified in real time. He talked about veterans, trauma, mental health. He spoke about purpose with enough conviction that you almost believed purpose had always been part of the plan, not something he'd grabbed after everything else fell apart. Louis listened, hands folded near his cup of water. So Louis said gently, "When you say you're trying to do something good," Harry nodded. "Yes, do you ever worry?" Louis continued that the story of doing good becomes more important than the doing. Harry froze for a fraction of a second, just a blink too long, a breath that didn't know where to go. He forced a chuckle. No, Louis didn't smile back, not because he was angry, because he was curious. "You don't?" Louis asked. Harry's fingers tightened together. "No, look, I'm not a saint, but I'm not performing." Louis tilted his head slightly, voice still soft. "You're a public figure. Performance is part of it." Harry's smile returned, but it was thinner now, stretched like a sheet over something sharp. "I've had enough of people telling me what I am," Harry said, and the words came out faster than he intended. He slowed himself. "What I mean is, I've lived under expectation my whole life, and when I finally speak for myself, people call it performance." Louis nodded slowly. "That makes sense." Harry exhaled, relieved again until Louis added almost casually, And yet you did choose the microphone. The sentence was light, the impact wasn't. Harry stared at him. What? Louis' tone didn't change. That was what made it worse. You could have disappeared, Louis said. Plenty of people with money and fame vanish into privacy. They buy an island of quiet. You didn't. Harry felt heat rise up his neck. Because I'm trying to help people. Louis nodded, still calm. Right, I'm not denying that. I'm just looking at the shape of it. Harry leaned forward, elbows closer to the table, his voice sharpened. The shape of it. Louis opened his hands slightly, like someone showing they weren't holding a weapon. The shape of your life since leaving. The way everything becomes content. A book, a documentary, an interview, a statement, a response to a response. Harry's eyes narrowed. So, what are you saying? Le paused. The room felt suddenly too quiet, as if the walls were listening. Now I'm saying, Louis replied carefully, that some people feel like they can't tell where your pain ends and your brand begins. Harry's jaw tightened, and for the first time. Since the recording began, the polished print slipped just enough for something raw to look through. That's insulting, Harry said. And there was no laugh this time. Louis didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He didn't retreat. He simply held Harry's gaze and said gently, "Is it?" Harry stared at him, fingers loosening from their interlaced grip, hands separating like they were preparing for a fight he hadn't planned to have today. The red recording light blinked quietly, and Harry realized with a slow, cold certainty that Louis wasn't attacking him at all. He was doing something far worse. He was letting Harry hear himself. Harry drew a breath, about to answer, about to reclaim the room, the narrative, the control. When Louis added one more sentence, softer than the others, almost compassionate, "Do you ever worry that if the title disappeared, the story would have to stand on its own?" Harry's eyes hardened, his mouth opened, and the air between the microphones suddenly felt like a cliff. Harry didn't answer right away. He did the thing people do when they're trying not to explode. He smiled like he'd been handed a joke. He didn't find funny. His eyes held Louis, but the smile didn't reach them. The studio lights made everything look warm, yet the air between their microphones felt cold enough to crack. Louis stayed still. No smugness, no victory lap, just that calm, patient stare, the kind that didn't demand a response because it assumed the response would come on its own. Harry finally spoke slowly, as if each word had to pass through a filter first. "You're framing it like I'm selling something." Louis nodded once. "I'm asking if it feels that way to you." "It doesn't." Harry snapped, then caught the edge of his own tone. He softened it into something that resembled politeness. "It's not like that." Louis glanced down briefly at the notes on his lap, not to hide, but to re-enter the conversation through another door. He said, "Then help me understand something." Harry's fingers tapped once on the table, quiet but sharp. "Go on." Louis' voice stayed gentle. "When you speak about privacy, you also speak publicly about very private things in detail." Harry's face tightened. "Because I was forced to." Louis looked up. "Forced?" Harry leaned forward a fraction. "Do you think I wanted my life dragged through the papers for decades? Do you think I wanted lies printed about my wife, about my children?" Louis didn't argue. He didn't say yes or no. He let Harry fill the silence, which was exactly the problem. Harry could hear how fast he was talking. "So when you ask about titles and stories and brands," Harry continued, "it's like you're ignoring context. The context is that I'm reacting to a machine that never stops." Louis nodded slowly. "The machine being the press. The press, the institution, the expectations," Harry said, counting on his fingers now, irritation surfacing in the rhythm, all of it. Louis' eyes stayed on him, and leaving was the only way out. "Yes," Harry said too quickly. "Exactly." Lewin held a pause, then asked in the same calm tone, "Did it feel like freedom when you left?" Harry blinked. The question landed differently. It wasn't accusing. It was almost sympathetic, but Harry's pride didn't allow him to take the kindness without suspicion. "It felt like survival," Harry replied. Louis nodded again. "Survival, right?" He hesitated, then added softly. "And yet you're still orbiting it. The family, the history, the conflict." Harry's eyes narrowed, "Because they're still doing it." Louis tipped his head. "Do you think they are? Or do you think the story needs them to stay relevant?" The sentence was spoken like a feather. It hit like a brick. Harry's jaw tightened. "That's a ridiculous thing to say." Louis didn't flinch. "Is it?" Harry exhaled sharply through his nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You're doing that thing." Louis raised his brows slightly. "The thing where you pretend you're just asking," Harry said, voice rising, "but you're implying something ugly." Louis' expression didn't change. He looked genuinely curious. "What am I implying?" Harry leaned forward, shoulders squaring. "That I'm using my family, that I'm using my mother, that I'm using my wife. That I'm using..." He cut himself off, then restarted harder. "That I'm using pain." Louis watched him. "Are you there?" It was clean, simple, no cushion. Harry stared, almost offended by how calmly the question had been placed on the table between them like a cup of water. "I'm not," Harry said, and now the politeness was gone. "I've lived it. That's the difference." Louis nodded as if accepting the statement as factual. Then he said, "You've lived it, yes, but living something and controlling how it's told are two different things." Harry's fingers curled slightly. The microphone caught a subtle scrape of skin against tabletop. "I'm allowed to tell my story." "Of course," Louis said, "I agree." Harry blinked. That wasn't the answer he'd prepared for. Louis continued, "I'm just interested in the moment where telling your story becomes telling it in a way that punishes other people." Harry's mouth opened, then closed. "Punishes." Louis' voice stayed soft. "Your brother, your father, your family. Even if you feel justified, do you ever worry that the story becomes a weapon?" Harry's eyes flashed. "They've been weaponizing me since I was a child." Louis nodded. "So this is retaliation." Harry's face went still. He didn't like the word. Retaliation sounded petty. It sounded human in an unflattering way. "It's accountability," Harry said. "You call it retaliation because you're not the one who lived it." Louis held the pause. "That's fair." Harry's shoulders eased a fraction again until Louis added, "But accountability usually comes with specifics, evidence, a process. What you're describing sometimes looks like narrative." Harry's laugh this time was short, sharp, and humorless. "So now I'm making it up." Louis shook his head. "No, not making it up, shaping it." Harry's voice turned colder. "Everyone shapes their story." "Yes," Louis agreed, "but not everyone's story collapses if the villains disappear." Harry froze again, the words threading into his chest like a needle. Louis didn't stop. He leaned in slightly, not aggressively, just enough to show he was committed to the question. "If your family apologized tomorrow," Louis asked, "and the tabloids vanished and the cameras stopped, what would be left?" Harry stared at him, offended but also caught, because the question wasn't about scandal. It wasn't even about the royals. It was about identity. Harry straightened in his chair. He tried to reclaim control with posture, with voice, with rank. Even if rank was the very thing he claimed not to want, "I'd still be me," Harry said. "I'd still do my work." Louis nodded. "And the work would still need the same spotlight." Harry's eyes narrowed. "Why are you obsessed with spotlight?" Louis's tone didn't change. "Because you say you want privacy, but you keep returning to the stage." Harry leaned forward a little too far, his hand lifted slightly, palm up, like he was presenting the obvious. "I return because people need to hear the truth." Louis' eyes stayed steady, or because silence feels like losing. Harry went very still. The studio was so quiet you could hear the faint electrical hum of equipment. Harry's lips parted, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled, but the control was brittle. "You're trying to paint me as weak." Louis blinked, almost surprised. "No, I'm trying to understand what you're fighting." Harry stared at him, breathing shallowly now, as if the air had thickened. He looked past Louis for a second, toward the producers' side of the room, toward the unseen crew, then back again. He forced a smile that didn't belong on his face. Harry said very softly, "Let's understand something." Louis waited. Harry leaned in until the microphone almost touched his mouth. "You've made a career," Harry said, voice quiet but sharp. Out of walking into other people's lives and letting the audience decide what to think, Louis didn't move. Harry continued, and now his words came with the slow confidence of someone choosing an escalation on purpose. "So tell me, Louis, when you ask these questions, is it because you genuinely care?" A beat, Harry's eyes hardened. "Or because you know this clip will go viral?" Louis blinked once. The calm for the first time faltered at the edges. Not fear, not anger, just a flicker of something real. And the recording light kept blinking, steady as a heartbeat, as Louis opened his mouth to answer. Louis didn't answer immediately, not because he didn't have one, but because this was the moment where answering too fast would turn the conversation into theater. He let the silence stretch long enough for it to feel intentional, long enough for Harry to realize the question had landed. The red recording light blinked steadily between them. Louis finally spoke, his voice lower now. "If I wanted a viral clip," he said, "I wouldn't let the silence do the work." Harry's jaw tightened. He leaned back slightly, folding his arms, not defensive exactly, but guarded. The smile from earlier was gone completely. "So you're saying this isn't performance," Harry replied. "I'm saying," Louis said carefully, "that performance usually looks louder." Harry let out a short breath. "You think I'm being loud?" "I think you're being precise," Louis said, "and precision usually comes from rehearsal." Harry's eyes snapped back to him. That's insulting, Louis didn't deny it, but it can also be survival. Harry's fingers flexed against his sleeve. "You keep using that word like you own it." Louis nodded. You're right, I don't. Harry leaned forward again, unable to stay still now. Then stop psychoanalyzing me. Louis' tone stayed level. I'm not analyzing you. I'm listening to the structure of the story. Harry frowned. The structure? Yes, Louis said. What comes first? What comes last? Who is allowed to be complex? Who isn't? Harry scoffed quietly. My family had plenty of complexity when they were tearing me apart. Louis tilted his head. Did they tear you apart or did they refuse to change the script? Harry's voice sharpened. You don't get to tell me what my family did. I'm not, Louis replied. I'm asking whether the conflict is about harm or control. Harry laughed again, this time louder, edged with disbelief. You really think this is about control? Louis met his eyes, don't you? The question sat between them like a live wire. Harry stared at Louis for a long second, then shook his head slowly. You see, he said, this is why people don't trust interviews like this. Louis raised an eyebrow. Because they ask questions, because they pretend to be neutral, Harry said, voice rising just a notch. But neutrality always favors power. Louis nodded. And who has power here? Harry didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted, then returned. They do, he said. The institution, the press, the crown. Louis's voice stayed soft. And you? Harry stiffened. What about me? You have an audience of millions, Louis said. A platform most people will never touch. Harry leaned back, lips pressed together. Because people want to hear the truth. Louis didn't argue that point. He approached from the side instead. Do you think, Louis asked, that the truth changes depending on who tells it? Harry hesitated just for a fraction of a second. No, he said this the truth. Louis nodded. Then why does your version leave so little room for anyone else's? Harry's voice hardened. Because their versions erased me. Louis leaned in slightly. Or because letting them speak weakens the narrative you've built. Harry's hand came up, palm outward. There it is. Narrative again. Yes, Louis said, because narratives protect people. Harry laughed bitter. They destroy people too. Louis didn't flinch, only when they're weaponized. Harry leaned forward suddenly, eyes sharp. You keep saying weaponized. I'm enjoying this. Louis held his gaze. Are you? Harry opened his mouth and stopped. The pause this time wasn't strategic. It was uncomfortable, real. Harry looked down at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but more dangerous. I didn't ask for any of this, he said. Not the title, not the attention, not the expectations. Louis nodded. But you're still choosing which parts to keep. Harry looked up. Because I have to. Or because, Louis said gently. Without them, you don't know where you end. That one hit. Harry's posture shifted like someone bracing internally. That's a cheap shot. Louis shook his head. It's an honest one. Harry leaned back, crossing his legs now, adopting a posture that screamed control. Let me ask you something. Louis waited. You've interviewed extremists, cult leaders, people who lie for a living. Harry said, you sit across from them calm as anything. Louis nodded. Yes. Harry's eyes narrowed. Do you think I belong in that category? Louis didn't smile. No. Harry exhaled sharply. Then stop treating me like a case study. I'm not, Louis said. I'm treating you like someone who believes deeply in their own story. Harry's voice rose, because it's my life. And that's exactly why it matters how it's told, Louis replied. The tension in the room was no longer subtle. It hummed. Harry leaned in again, his voice low. You think you're exposing something? Louis replied just as quietly. I think you're revealing it. Harry's jaw clenched. You want a headline? Louis shook his head. I want clarity. Harry laughed once more, sharper now. Clarity at my expense. Louis's eyes didn't leave his truth usually cost someone something. Harry's patience finally cracked. So what is it you want me to say? Harry snapped. That I'm wrong. That I should shut up and disappear. Louis answered without hesitation. No, then what? I want to know, Louis said, voice steady. Whether the man sitting here still knows who he is when the cameras turn off. The room went silent again. Harry stared at him. This time, not angry, not defensive, but exposed. And somewhere off camera, a producer shifted in their chair, sensing that this conversation was no longer safely contained. Harry swallowed. When the cameras turn off, he said slowly, I don't stop existing. Louis nodded. I didn't say you did. Harry leaned closer, eyes locked. Then don't imply that my silence would mean nothing. Louis met him halfway. I'm implying that silence might mean everything. Harry inhaled sharply, his composure thinning like glass under pressure. This is crossing a line, he said. Louis's voice was calm but firm. You crossed it first. When you asked if I was chasing virality, Harry stared at him. The silence this time wasn't thoughtful. It was volatile and everyone in the room could feel it. This wasn't building toward resolution. It was building toward something breaking. Harry stood up without warning. Not dramatically, not angrily, just decisively. The chair scraped softly against the studio floor, a sound far louder than it should have been. Louis didn't move. He didn't speak. He only looked up, his expression unreadable but alert. Harry adjusted his jacket, a reflex more than a necessity. "This isn't a conversation anymore," Harry said. His voice was controlled, but the strain was obvious. "It's an interrogation dressed up as curiosity." Lewitt remained seated, calm, grounded. "You're free to leave," he said. "You always were." That did it. Harry let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's the illusion, isn't it?" He glanced toward the cameras, then deliberately away from them, as if refusing to give them the final word. "I came here to talk," Harry continued, not to be dissected. Louis nodded once. "Sometimes those two things overlap." Harry shook his head. "Not like this." He took a step back, then another. The microphones picked up his breath now. "Quick, shallow, human. You don't get to define me," Harry said, turning back one last time. "Not you, not the audience, not this format." Louis didn't argue. "I never tried to," he replied quietly. "I just asked who was doing it." Harry froze for half a second, then he turned and walked off set. No shouting, no security, no theatrics, just a door closing softly somewhere down the corridor. The red recording light stayed on. Louis sat there for a moment, hands folded, eyes unfocused, not victorious, not smug, thoughtful. Then he leaned slightly toward the microphone. That, he said almost to himself, was not a meltdown. He paused. That was a boundary. The camera held on him a beat longer than usual and then cut to black. If this conversation made you uncomfortable, it probably mattered. Like the video. Subscribe for more unfiltered confrontations and tell us in the comments who crossed the line.